Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Fantasy Baseball. I'm John Cutt, and I'm joined by my co host, as always, Patrick Fitzgerald. Patrick, how are you doing?
Hey John, I'm doing all right. Fantasy teams are doing well. The Orioles not so much. We're officially in the post Brandon Hyde era, so we only have one win so far in that era, so not looking too great. But yeah, just looking like a down season for the O's, but hopefully not for my fantasy teams. How are you?
I'm doing all right. The Twins, I believe it was 14 game win streak, did come to a close, and
On
then they got
fire.
rained. Yeah, they rained out a couple days, and then split a series with split two games with the Guardians yesterday. So looks like things are kind of coming back to earth for the Twins as well. But yeah, I mean, speaking about the O's, I mean, really, hopefully, it's we're coming to a close of the Mike Elias era, but I don't see that future happening anytime soon, unfortunately, for you guys.
Yeah, we'll see. He clearly has his strengths and weaknesses as a GM. I try to be a reasonable fan, and assume that the people who are running the teams know more than me. Like the last few years, I've kind of just given Mike Elias, the benefit of the doubt, put blind trust in him until he's shown that I shouldn't, and he's officially shown that he shouldn't. So I think it's fair to be a little more skeptical of his moves. I'm not calling for his head quite yet, but I get where some people are coming from.
Yeah, he's definitely an elite drafter. I think that's been shown for just with the success that you guys had for the past couple drafts. But team management maybe something a little leaves a little more to be desired. I'm sure.
Yeah, things are going to be put to the test. We got a lot of underperforming guys, and hopefully, the coaching and the player development is good enough to get them back on track.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely going to talk about a couple of those Orioles players in today's podcast. But in this episode, as always, we go over the latest news and notes around baseball, recap hitter and pitcher performances from this past week. And of course, we will give some streamer recommendations at the end of the show. But before we get into it, just a reminder that you can follow our podcast on Twitter at ThisWeekPL. And you can send us your fantasy baseball questions to our email at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. Lastly, make sure that you subscribe to or follow the podcast on whatever streaming platform that you listen to your podcasts on. Again, we're on all of them: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever else you listen to your podcast. Make sure you follow us and leave a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. All right, we are going to get into a very meaty injury news update. I feel like every week there's a lot, but it feels like there's some really big names at least this week who got either placed on the IL or are coming back from the IL. And we are going to start with Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton of my Minnesota Twins, who got put on the 7-day concussion IL officially last week. And it sounds like Correa is progressing a little bit quicker than Buxton, which is unfortunate because Buxton is the more fantasy relevant of the two. But hopefully both those guys are coming back soon. They're both eligible to come back by the end of this week. I would not be surprised if Correa plays in this weekend series, but Buxton might not get activated until next week. Justin Verlander of the Giants going on the 15-day IL with pectoral discomfort. Some of the options to replace him include Kyle Harrison and Jordan Hicks, who are in the bullpen. But another name that's been mentioned has been Carson Wisenhunt, who is their top prospect in AAA. We'll see who gets the call up there. Aaron Nola of the Phillies going on the 15th day out with a sprained right ankle. He has not started throwing yet, but the Phillies are kind of expecting this to be a relatively short stay since it's not anything with his arm. It's literally just with his ankle. So hopefully he gets back soon. Reese Olson of the Detroit Tigers going on the 15-day IL with mild inflammation in his right ring finger. This was after actually he had a really good start earlier this week. Unfortunately, is dealing with injury now, and he's going to be out for the next 2 weeks. Porter Hodge of the Cubs, 15 DIL with a left oblique issue. Looks like Drew Pomeranz and Daniel Palencia are next in line for saves. Ryan Presley, who is the former closer, who they traded for this year, obviously, is pretty much out of the equation. It doesn't seem like Craig Counsell has a lot of faith in him, and so it doesn't look like he is going to be in the pecking order for saves. He might get a save here or two there, but I would not be going out to get shares of Presley at this moment. Eduardo Rodriguez of the Diamondbacks going on the 15-day IL with shoulder inflammation. He has resumed throwing, so this seems to be a relatively short stay. But in his place right now is Ryan Nelson, who's had some nice stints of brilliance over the past couple seasons, but really nothing to write home about. Dylan Cruz of the Nationals going on the 10-day IL with an oblique strain. He was dealing with some lower back issues. Turns out it's an oblique issue for him. Chris Martin of the Texas Rangers going on the 15-day IL with right shoulder fatigue. Kind of an important part of their bullpen, but at the same time wasn't necessarily a guy who was going to be always in the mix for saves. So maybe something to watch in your save hold league, but probably not a lot of fantasy relevance there. JT Ginn of the Athletics going on the 15-day IL with a right quad strain just after coming back from the IL. And I believe he was facing the Angels on Monday. Had a pretty good start, and then unfortunately goes back on the injured list. So kind of unlucky there for Ginn. Showed some nice stuff in his first start back, and then immediately he's unavailable again. Kirby Yates of the Dodgers going the 15 DIL with left hamstring strain. He was kind of the de facto closer, if you could call anyone a closer in LA. Obviously, they're a bit more closer by committee, but obviously a big hit if you have him in a saves hold league. Xavier Edwards of Miami going on the 10-day IL with mid back strain. Of course, you probably had him if he was your main source of steal, so you'll probably have to look elsewhere for that right now. But kind of an unfortunate thing for him, especially because he was batting leadoff for Miami as well, so getting a lot of plate appearances there, and now he's going to be out for a couple weeks. Fernando Cruz of the Yankees going on the 15 DIL with shoulder inflammation. He hadn't pitched since Sunday, so this felt like a move that was going to happen. He's definitely kind of picked up this season a little bit. He's a really legit candidate for holds in that bullpen, but unfortunately now going on the injured list. And then Gio Urshela of the Athletics had a strained hamstring in today's games on Thursday. He's likely to be placed on the injured list, but that official move has not happened yet. So yeah, among all of that, any thoughts about any of these placements? Obviously, a couple big names there with Nola. Reese Olson and Porter Hodge have a lot of fantasy relevance. Dylan Cruz obviously one of the top prospects this year. But yeah, any thoughts here on how this is going to impact your fantasy teams?
Yeah, for Nola, hopefully it's a short stint. He's able to get right. Obviously, he's had a really rough start to the season. Cruz had a miserable first couple weeks and seemed to be getting back on track. I know the OPS was still around 600, but a lot of that was weighed down by his early struggles. So it's unfortunate to see him go down, especially with the oblique. For the rest of it, again, going down, that kind of solidifies Gunnar Hoglund's rotation spot for at least for now, which is nice. He's had a couple of rough starts lately, but I'm hoping that he can get back on track. Kirby Yates, that basically should just increase Tanner Scott's save share a little bit, I would say. And aside from that, Olsen seems like a minor injury, which is nice because he was really doing well. He was like a Monday afternoon injury replacement, so hopefully you were able to get him out of your weekly locks, like I was just barely. I saw that he was placed in the island and was able to get another pitcher in. And then with Eduardo Rodriguez, it'll be nice to see Ryan Nelson get a couple starts. He's got a really good fastball, which I know Nick always talks about, but he's still kind of struggling to come up with some reliable secondaries. So he might be able to do well at times, but not the most reliable option. But he's probably worth keeping an eye on in deeper leagues.
Yep. He's one of those guys that like comes up every single year and it's like kind of worth keeping for a couple starts, but he could just never seem to find a way to stick into the Arizona rotation.
Yeah, they have a pretty strong unit too. I mean, with Fott and Kelly's been really good this year too. So it's kind of a tough rotation to break into right now.
Yeah. All right, looking at some more positive news, looking at some big returns from the injury list, we're going to start with Spencer Strider. Again, we mentioned this last week, but he officially came back to the mound on Tuesday, started against the Nationals, I believe. Yeah, he's at least looking healthy-ish for the time being. No injury to report of, which is good. Aaron Savali of the Brewers ended up skipping his last rehab start, and the Brewers started him today. Went 4 innings. George Kirby finally made his season debut for the Mariners against the Astros. 3 innings, 2 earned runs, and 1 whip so far in that start. So that's still ongoing while we're recording. Ian Jabot of the Reds return on Wednesday to the Reds bullpen. He'll be an interesting choice for holds, but obviously it's the Reds bullpen, so there's not that many opportunities in the first place. Ian Happ of the Cubs did return and immediately was slotted back into the leadoff spot, I believe on Tuesday. So he is healthy after coming back from, I believe, it was an oblique injury. Hunter Green of the Reds is scheduled to be activated on Friday to start against the Cubs. Walker Buehler of the Red Sox was activated from the 15-day IL, I believe on Tuesday or Wednesday. Immediately got thrown out of the game that he pitched in, though. So it was a short 3-inning stint in his comeback from the injured list. Jake Rogers of Detroit is back from the injured list. The main impact here is to Dylan Dingler, who's going to get a cut in playing time. Dingler had some really nice run as a catcher this year, or so far this year. Kind of became a legitimate kind of second catcher in 2 catcher leagues. It wasn't really any in a 1 catcher league conversation, but he did have some pretty solid weeks. Teoscar Hernandez and Tommy Edman from the Dodgers were both activated from the IL. The corresponding moves: James Outman was sent back down to AAA. Chris Taylor, longtime Dodger, was released. Which the big news here really is that Hye-Sung Kim is actually staying with the major league team, but he's been relegated more to a utility and pinch runner role. And they've been kind of shuffling around some of the playing time. I mean, obviously, it's only been a couple days, but I know that Dave Roberts, the manager there, has been kind of trying to figure out how to get kind of the trio of Tommy Edman, Andy Pajes, and Hye-Sung Kim, a playing time, especially as Edman's rehab was actually a little bit slower. So I think they're slowly bringing him back a little bit. And they're probably going to just stick with the hot hand for the time being on that team. Ezequiel Tovar of the Rockies had a hip issue, but did return last weekend, so he is back from the injured list. So, yeah, a couple big pitchers. Obviously, the names to focus on: Strider, Savali, and Kirby. Any thoughts on those guys? Oh, and Hunter Green as well, I should say. Any thoughts on any of those guys coming back from injury?
Yeah, it's just super exciting to see George Kirby make his season debut and Spencer Strider get back on the mound. Hopefully, it's for longer than Strider's first return from the IL went. Kirby, I don't think he's going to be fully built up for this start just because he only got to around 65 pitches in the minors, but hopefully the next one he's full systems go. And then obviously Hunter Green too coming back. I mean, that's really 3 aces in the span of a week, which is really nice to see. I guess Clayton Kershaw also did return a former ace. Forgot to put him on here, but he looked a little rough in his first outing, so he might not be super fantasy relevant for our shallower formats, which is unfortunate. And then on the Dodgers side, it's obviously unfortunate to see long tenured guys like Austin Barnes and Chris Taylor get DFA'd and released from the team. But it's nice to see that it is a little bit more of a meritocracy with Dalton Rushing getting pulled up and Kim getting to stay up after some strong play. So hopefully they can continue to find games for him. I think some of it could hopefully come at Michael Conforto's expense. I know he's been struggling a little bit in left field, so maybe they could mix Edman or Kim in over there, maybe bump Pies over there, something like that to get their best bats in the lineup.
It's the classic Dodgers problem is that they just have too many good players for a lot of positions. So Chris Taylor was obviously a part of that equation a couple years ago. He was basically the super utility guy for that team. And now it looks like the mix there is maybe Tommy Edman shuffles around a little bit, and Hye-Sung Kim kind of is in that super utility role now.
Right. I mean, you looked at their bench a couple weeks ago, and they had Austin Barnes, Chris Taylor, Miguel Rojas, and Kike Hernandez. Like, you don't need 4 crusty veterans on the bench, right? Like, you need some clubhouse guys and some guys with some versatility. But Barnes and Taylor, they just weren't offering a lot, so it's nice to see them get replaced by more high upside younger guys.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to a bunch of just injury updates. We'll try to run through these pretty quickly, but of course the biggest one is Ronald Acuna Jr. of Atlanta. He was raking in his rehab assignment in AAA, and he's likely to actually debut tomorrow, which is crazy. So if you are lucky enough to have him on your team, on your IL, make sure that you activate him in time for that start. Gleyber Torres of the Tigers exited today with lower leg tightness. We'll see if that resolves in anything. Anthony Santander of the Blue Jays is dealing with left hip inflammation, has missed a couple games so far, but no indication that he's going to be sent to the injured list just yet. Jonah Heim of the Texas Rangers was removed from Wednesday's game with a compressed nerve in his hand. It's making difficult for him to kind of grip the bat, and so we'll see if that results in an injured list trip. I think all signs kind of point to it being a trip to the injured list because it's a nerve issue, as opposed to something that you kind of easily fix, but it also is a little bit of pain dependent in how well Heim can handle the issue. Mike Trout of the Angels, he's not running at full speed. News reports kind of described it as 80%, but apparently this is the last test that he needs to pass before coming back to the majors. So right now the timetable looks like he could be coming back either this weekend, which I think is a little aggressive, most likely early next week. Tyler Glasnow of the Dodgers has progressed to throwing a bullpen session on Friday, and that will, hopefully if that goes well, then he'll go to rehab assignments, probably for a couple starts at least, and then finally join the Major League team, so it probably looks like he's a month off from returning at least. Jacob Wilson of the Athletics is currently day-to-day after getting hit by a pitch in the forearm, so just dealing with some pain there, and I think the Athletics are just making sure there's no structural damage with him. Lane Thomas of the Guardians is aiming for a return early next week. I don't know how much value he has in 3 outfielder leagues right now, but I would say maybe in 5 outfielder leagues, give him a look, just because he had a really nice season last year, and hopefully that kind of continues in 2025. Richard Fitz of the Red Sox set to make a rehab start in AAA. He's been out for about a month at this point. It'll be interesting to see what Boston does when he is healthy, if they're going to bring him back to the majors. But that is something to look at, especially because the next two names, Cutter Crawford and Tanner Houck, are both resuming throwing. Cutter Crawford actually was facing hitters in live BP today. He's still a ways out from joining the team, probably a month or two, but he is progressing there. Tanner Houck is probably a little bit more forward in his rehab. He is likely to progress to bullpen sessions and rehab starts starting next week. So probably a couple weeks before Tanner Houck is ready to return to the majors. Masataka Yoshida, also the Red Sox, his starting a throwing program, but for him, because Devers is at DH, there's pretty much the only role available for Yoshida is playing in the outfield, and so the Sox need to know basically that he's able to play good defense and throw a ball from the outfield before he can get activated. More injuries for the Red Sox. Romy Gonzalez, who we talked about a couple weeks ago as the replacement for Tristan Casas, well, he, of course, was back on the injured list with a quad contusion, and so Boston truly does not have any first baseman right now. They've got other players moonlighting as first baseman, and I believe reading NBC Sports Edge, they called it the cold corner, which I thought was kind of fun, just because the lack of offensive talent right now at first base for the Red Sox. Jacob Young of the Nationals, he's still day-to-day with a left shoulder issue. His teammate Ahmed Rosario also day-to-day after dealing with a leg injury that required some stitches. So his is not necessarily a muscle issue, but is dealing with some pain in his legs. Jared Jones, probably the unfortunate news of the week of the Pirates. He underwent surgery to repair his UCL, most likely in the internal brace procedure. So I think right now the Pirates are saying he could be back in a year. Really unfortunate for Jared Jones. I don't even think he pitched this season. And last season he was really good for probably around, I want to say it was like 8 to 10 starts, and then kind of faded down the stretch. Pirates did kind of shuffle him back between AAA and the majors to kind of preserve his arm for a little bit. All for naught, though, unfortunately, because he is now going to be out for the next year. Ronel Blanco of the Astros, dealing with elbow soreness, has not been placed on the IL yet, but he did leave the team on their road trip, went back to Houston to be evaluated, so never a good sign. We'll see what the news is there. Tyler Estrada of the Rockies is taking batting practice and facing high-end velocity. He could progress to a rehab assignment soon. Andrew Benintendi of the White Sox is starting a rehab assignment on Wednesday. Patrick Sandoval of the Red Sox, another pitcher that they've got in their livery of injured pitchers. He is throwing off a mound, but he is also coming back from the internal brace procedure on his UCL. So he got that in July of last year, so he's still a few months from returning, but is a good sign that he is progressing in his recovery. Yuri Perez of the Marlins, he started today in AAA. He had 2 earned runs in 3.1 innings, had 7 strikeouts, threw 61 pitches. He is sitting 97.5 miles an hour, which is in line with his previous velocity. Again, he's on the 60-day IL, so there's still going to be some time before he can be activated. But it does look good that he is slowly increasing the number of pitches in a start. Ramon Laureano of the Orioles, currently day-to-day with left ankle discomfort, has missed a couple games. Shohei Ohtani, not necessarily injured, but he is starting to incorporate breaking balls into his flat ground throwing sessions, which is just another sign in his progression in coming back to pitch this season. Of course, the big question is, should Ohtani even pitch in the first place? But looks like the Dodgers are trying to see if it's going to be possible for him to be on the mound this year. Jazz Chisholm of the Yankees could resume his rehab later this week. He's dealing with multiple tears in his obliques, so a little bit of a slower injury to come back from, but he is progressing slowly. Bryce Miller of the Mariners threw his first bullpen session on Tuesday. He's hoping to make a return, just like his teammate George Kirby, but probably will be a couple weeks before he does that. Alex Cobb of the Tigers received a series of injections to address his right hip inflammation. He is basically progressing really slowly, and his rehab probably is going to be up to a month before he even really starts seeing any sort of minor league rehab action. 2 pitchers from the Mets, Sean Manaea and both Frankie Montas, are facing pitchers. Sean Manaea threw a bullpen session on Wednesday. No timetable on his return. Montas did face hitters in live BP, and so he's probably a little bit more along in his return. Max Scherzer of the Blue Jays threw a 33-pitch bullpen session on Tuesday. He was dealing with some back issues, which we talked about last week, so Blue Jays are very slow in bringing him back. Colton Cowser of the Orioles has started a rehab assignment in High A. He was on the 60 DIL, so he can come off the injured list on May 30th, likely targeting as soon as possible, probably June 1st, for him to come back to the majors. Parker Meadows of the Tigers is starting a rehab assignment on Tuesday. AJ Puck started a throwing program, so it'll be a couple of weeks before he's probably starting any sort of rehab assignment, and then probably a month after that before he's ready to return to the team. Ha-Seong Kim of the Rays is starting a minor league rehab assignment this week. He's returning from off-season shoulder injury. Off-season shoulder surgery, I should say, and so starting a rehab assignment. Good news for him, but it'll probably be a couple weeks before he returns. Michael Kepich of the Dodgers. The Dodgers are saying he's going to need 3 more rehab assignments before returning to the majors. He did make another appearance on Tuesday as a reliever. Maybe that's a week before he's back, which would be good news for the Dodgers since Kirby Yates obviously was put on the injured list. Casey Mize threw a 5-inning simulated game on Monday, should be returning this weekend. Shota Imanaga of the Cubs is scheduled to resume throwing off a bullpen mound by the end of next week, so there'll be some time before he's available. Matt Wallner started a rehab assignment this week in AAA. He's already hit, I think, 2 homers, so he is looking decent to come back pretty soon. Yordan Alvarez still experiencing soreness when he swings a bat, so it might be some time before he's coming back. I think we've said a couple weeks in a row that, maybe this is the weekend that Yordan comes back, and that keeps getting pushed back. Yu Darvish of the Padres making his return soon. Don't exactly know when, but it is something that is going to happen, apparently, according to the Padres. Really unfortunate news here for Hayden Wesneski. He's going to undergo Tommy John surgery. He had a nice couple starts for Houston. Obviously came over in that trade for Kyle Tucker, but now is going to undergo Tommy John and be out for at least the next year, if not more. Justin Martinez of the Diamondbacks made a minor league rehab assignment in AAA on Tuesday. Likely return to the team this weekend. Will be a very important piece for them in their bullpen. Brandon Woodruff, who we've also been saying could be coming back this weekend, is not coming back. He's dealt with a setback last week, as we mentioned. He did complete a bullpen session on Sunday. Is going to made a rehab start on Wednesday. Vila was noticeably down. Milwaukee's probably going to have him out for at least 1, if not 2 more rehab assignments. But this might be the point if you're still holding on to Woodruff in a league that has very limited IL spots. It might be time to jump ship, just because the bullpen sessions also aren't looking very good. Sawyer Gibson-Long of the Tigers, he is now built up to 45 pitches over 2 2/3 innings. Did that this past weekend in High A. His rehab should move to AAA soon. Obviously a nice young pitcher, one of Nick's sleeper picks at the beginning of the season. Fortunate that he's dealing with injury, but yeah, he should be maybe joining the major league team. We'll see what the Tigers do with their rotation. It's actually looking a lot better this year than it was last year, as we mentioned. But obviously, we just said Reese Olson hit the IL. He's probably going to come back sooner than Sawyer Gibson-Long, but it is a team that, hey, sometimes injuries happen, and having an addition like him could be really good. So, yeah, that is a lot of names. I think I'm just going to pull out a couple, see how you feel about them. Obviously, Acuna, that's the biggest name that's coming back. Would love to see how he does. Is he pretty much just a must start for you once he comes back from the injured list, or do you want to wait a bit to see how the major league Ronald Acuna looks?
No, you just go for it. I mean, he's such a tremendous talent. Plug him in, be excited that your stash is finally back. I think it's around maybe when we expected, maybe even a little earlier. Yeah, it'll be great. I don't know how much he's going to run compared to what we're used to from him, as he's kind of been honest about in spring training, but he's going to be a great average source and still a good power speed guy. Jones and Wisniewski, the TJ, super unfortunate. Jared Jones, just another example of a guy who sprains his UCL and tries to rehab unsuccessfully. It just seems like whenever you hear that and you hear a guy's going to try to rehab, you just got to be super pessimistic about their chances of making it through that, unfortunately. And then Woodruff, super concerning. I've been stashing him in a no IL league this whole time, and I think this might be the week I cut him just because I also have Reese Olson, who just hit the IL in the same league, and Olson, it seems like a shorter-term thing, and he's been producing, right? Woodruff seems to be a little bit of a shell of his former self. His velo is down like 4 miles per hour in his most recent start. I'm sure he's taking his foot off the gas a little bit because it's a minor league game and he wants to work on stuff and get through it healthy. But I mean, that's super concerning for me. So I don't know how much longer I can hold him in the no IL. I think he's still a fine IL stash, but I definitely wouldn't be plugging him in right when he's back just because we don't know what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I think my opinion on Woodruff, I have him in TGFBI, so I'm pretty much ready to cut bait. At this point, it's like, what's the point of holding back, too, right? Like, you got to show if you got the velocity, because if you don't, like, who knows what happens when you're up to the majors and all of a sudden you don't have it, right? Then at that point, you're just toast. So it is unfortunate he's dealing with this. Obviously, missed all of last season with shoulder issues. And struggling to come back is hard to see for a guy who, just a couple years ago was an absolute dominating force on the mound.
Yeah, and I think the surgery he got was like a shoulder capsule reconstruction or something super invasive. And I don't think that I think research has shown that shoulder injuries can actually be more detrimental than an elbow injury, just because Tommy John is pretty good at this point in terms of success rate and return to the mound. So he might never be the guy that he used to be. So that you kind of gotta reduce your expectations a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, super unfortunate for Woodruff. Some kind of minor transactional news. Robert Hassel III called up one of the top prospects in the Juan Soto trade, but got kind of eclipsed by the other guys that were sent over. Obviously, you got the pitchers in terms of Mackenzie Gore and why am I blanking on the other pitcher right now?
Susana and
Yeah,
Abrams
Harlan
and
Susana
yeah.
and Abrams. Yeah. So Robert Hassel, a little younger than the other guys, but he was a big part of that trade. Finally, is going to make his debut. I believe he actually got a single in his first at bat today. So congratulations, Robert Hassel. Kyle Gibson was DFA'd to kind of no one's surprise. So had 4 starts with the O's, I believe, and none of them were great as far as I remember.
Even worse than Charlie Morton.
Yeah, somehow they didn't even want to send him to the bullpen. They were just like, we're just gonna release you. Matt Shaw was recalled back to the Cubs. He was raking in AAA. Actually, had like a bunch of homers this past weekend in Iowa, and so the Cubs were like, "All right, we'll call you up again." Mick Abel called up through 6 scoreless innings in his MLB debut, and then was immediately sent down. Of course, he was with the Phillies. That was a pretty. It was a debut with a lot of people kind of seeing how it was going to go, since I believe he's the #1 prospect in pitching prospect in the Phillies organization. Can't remember what the
Maybe
is.
2 behind Painter, I think.
Oh, sure, yeah, that's true. Painter sometimes just falls off my radar with how much injuries he has, but yeah, nice to see a good start from Mick. All right. Well, that is a lot of injury news. We are going to now go through player performances. And yeah, starting on Friday, who we got, Patrick?
Yes, take a breath, John, after all that injury stuff. Friday the 16th, our hitter recap was done by Justin Wainwright, and it was Canario is a gold mine. Shout out to Alexander Canario. I am not going to talk about him just because while he does have some intriguing tools, he's not really on our radar yet in shallower leagues. So I'm going to talk about another breakout guy who may or may not be on our radar in our shallower leagues. And that is a guy who's hoping to have a little bit of a career resurgence. Will Benson on the Cincinnati Reds. He was 2 for 4 with a home run, a run, and 3 RBI on Friday. And then I believe it was Sunday, he hit 2 more homers. So he was promoted a week or 2 ago and just has been absolutely on fire. On Friday, the only place more dangerous for pitchers than Wrigley Field was Great American Ballpark, where its small confines compared with the heat and humidity allowed 4 home runs, including a 3-run shot from Will Benson. He was called up on May 10th when Jake Fraley went on the IL, and he's been their best hitter over the past week. The Reds were not scheduled to face a lefty for a few days after the 16th, so Will Benson definitely took advantage with those 2 homers, like I said. And he's been sitting a little bit this week because he's kind of in a strict platoon, but he has been, just absolutely going off, and he showed some power speed upside in the past. So is he fantasy relevant again now, or is this kind of just a hot week, that's going to be the best week of his season?
Yeah, just looking at historical numbers, I mean, he's a guy who, if he played a full season, probably is banging on the door of like a 25-25 season.
Mhm.
The scary thing is the strikeouts, right? 2022 and 2023, 31% strikeout rate. 2024, which, maybe not necessarily his best year statistically, but the one that he played the most games in, almost a 40% strikeout rate, which is kind of crazy. 38 plate appearances so far, 26% strikeout rate. So small sample size, but maybe some improvement there. But also he's got a isolated slugging of 529. So, take all those stats with a huge grain of salt. I don't know if I'd say he's fantasy relevant. I think maybe you could take a flyer on him in 5 outfielder leagues,
Mhm.
but he's in the number 7 spot for the Reds. Obviously, if he's got a bunch of home games and they're facing a bunch of righties, I think it makes sense, right? I think him as a streamer could work. I just don't know if this is a guy that you should be running to grab right now.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. I think it's pure streamer territory, like you said, home and or with a bunch of righties coming up. I think that's kind of his main use. I'm not adding him. I saw him added in my 12 teamer, but I'm not adding him to drop a guy like Brian Reynolds who's really struggling, but I believe in a lot more, or like Jordan Beck who's been pretty hot that I you can add or I did add in a 12 teamer. The batting average is going to be bad, right? Maybe he gets bumped up a little more in an OBP league because he does usually run super high walk rates along with the strikeout rates. But yeah, I think it's pure streamer territory. And you ride the heater when you get it, and yeah, not much more than that. He's a super toolsy player who I think was a super high draft pick that hasn't quite figured it out. So it would be fun to see him. Kind of revitalize his career, but I don't think he needs to be really on your fantasy radar all that much in our 10 and 12 teamers. On the pitching side, on the 16th, Logan Evans was the cover boy for Nick. Evans is a place on earth was his title, the SP Roundup. I'm going to talk about another guy who has been fantastic this year, one of the best pitchers in the league and for our fantasy team so far. That's Nate Eovaldi of the Rangers. He went against the Astros on this day. He threw 5 2/3 scoreless innings with 2 hits, 3 walks, and 5 strikeouts. So not his best outing of the season because he's been so good, but a guy who definitely deserves a shout out. He had 13 whiffs and a 34% CSW and 93 pitches. And after this outing, Nick threw the ace is going to ace tag on him, saying that he was tired of denying it. He was super reliable, rocking with all 4 pitches. Even though the splitter only had a 36% strike rate, he put it in competitive locations against righties, even though they spat on it. And he didn't face a lot of lefties to rely on the splitter too much. So he kind of relied on his fastball and his other secondaries a little bit more. And even still, with a bad splitter performance, he had a great outing. So Eovaldi actually threw 6 more innings of 1-run ball today against the Yankees. So these stats that I have on him so far, he was actually the loser today, even though he gave up 1 run. So now he's 4-3. He's throwing 67 in the third innings with over 70 strikeouts, and his ratios are right around a 1.6 ERA and a .8 WHIP. So he is, if not the best pitcher in fantasy so far, definitely in the top 5. But he's a guy who has posted ERAs in the last, I think, 5 years that have been between like 3.5 and 3.9. So incredibly consistent, solid, but not spectacular production. So what we're seeing from Eovaldi so far definitely is different than what we're used to from him. So are we selling high or are we just riding it out? What would we want in return for a guy who's been one of the best pitchers in the league so far?
Yeah, Eovaldi is always interesting to me because I think it was 2 years ago he also had an incredibly hot first half of the season. Maybe not as electric as it has been for him this year, but very similar, right? Incredible numbers, and then there's the inevitable like July rolls around, the velocity dips by like 2 miles an hour on his fastball, and then we get the Eovaldi we kind of expect that's in like the mid threes ERA. So I personally am probably going to sell high on Eovaldi if I had him on a fantasy teams, which I don't. What could I get in return? I mean, I think if you can get like a really solid outfielder to bat, that probably would be great. If you could maybe get some pitchers who are, struggling a little bit but have a lot of high upside, maybe you could go for those guys. But I don't really know who that might be right now. Yeah, I as awesome as he has been this season, it's hard for me to trust it because I think we've seen this story before from him. And it's going to be a really awesome, probably another maybe month and a half that we get from Uvaldi, and then his velocity is going to dip again like it always does every single year, and then he'll be kind of back to the Uvaldi we more associate him with, I think, on a season by season basis.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'm basically with you. I'm not taking anything I can get for the guy because he's a good pitcher and he's shown that he can be a great pitcher. But I do expect some pretty strong regression in the ratios. He's not really better this year because his stuff is better. His velo is actually down a little bit, and his stuff, stuff plus all that stuff seems to be about the same or maybe a little bit lower. So I don't think that there's anything happening that would show and that would convince me that he's a different guy than he was. But obviously, he's still super useful for your teams. Maybe what about a guy like an outfielder like say a Suzuki or like Marcelo Zuna? He's more of a util, but might have outfield eligibility in some places. They're kind of like back end top 100 guys. Would that be enough for you to part with Eovaldi? Would you be looking for a little better?
I think with how good he's pitching, you probably want to try to get more.
Yeah.
And that also kind of it also is dependent on how much the manager you're trying to trade with knows what's going on with Eovaldi. But I think with these types of stats, you should be able to get a little bit better than someone like Marcelo Zuna. Who that is, I don't know. Like you're not getting you're probably not getting Riley Green with this type of with a pitcher like this, but maybe there's someone who's willing to part with like a high end outfielder too, who's like maybe in the 60s or 70s, something like that. Is maybe what I'd be thinking about.
Yeah, yeah, worth kicking the tires on. I put him. I told my league mates that I within the one place I have him that he's available. Haven't really gotten much interest yet, but he's not a guy I'm dying to sell, so I'm happy to continue riding the hot streak and get a lot of wins and quality starts out of him.
Right. At worst case, he ends up the season with like a 3.5 ERA, which is still really good for a guy that will likely pitch the entire season.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, moving on to Saturday. Thanks to Kevin O'Brien for the classical Tovar hitter recap article, of course, referring to Ezekiel Tovar. We were going to talk about a different shortstop, Dansby Swanson of the Cubs, 2 for 3 with a homer, 3 runs, an RBI, 2 walks, and 2 stolen bases. Swanson is currently ranking as the sixth best shortstop in 5x5 Roto leagues, thanks to a very explosive May. Quite impressive considering he was getting picked as the 18th shortstop based on ADP. He had a little bit of a down year in 2024, but he's returned to look like a hitter who can kind of flirt with a 25-20 season. Has a pretty decent average and good RBI and run numbers as well. Of course, being on that Cubs offense, which is pretty loaded. He's doing all of this from the back half of the lineup too. He's kind of interchangeable between 5, 6, and 7. He's been making most of his playing appearances. Obviously, he's not getting 4 every single night. So the reality is that it's going to be tough for Swanson to break into the top half of that loaded Cubs lineup. I was mentioned Ian Happ is batting leadoff, but they still have Kyle Tucker there as well as a couple other guys. And so I don't know if he continues to hit, maybe they move him up in the lineup, but there really isn't a lot of space for him to do that. So assuming he stays in this kind of 5, 6, 7 range, is Dansby Swanson someone that you'd want to target in a trade? Do you believe like this type of production is real from him, where he can finish with like a 25-20 season, or is this really hot month for him?
Yeah, I think it's within the realm of possibilities, especially given the hot start that he's off to. And like you said, the Cubs offense is really solid. So while that might hurt his chances of moving up the lineup, it's going to help his counting stats. I don't know if I would want to target him necessarily just because he's a player with a consistently decent but not exceptional fantasy profile. I think he's a great guy to target between picks 100 and 200 pretty much every year, depending on how high he's going based on how he did last year. Last year, he struggled a little bit, right? So he was going closer to that pick 200 range. So he's always a guy that I like to, flag as a potential target at that point. I don't think it doesn't really look like there's anything different in his profile in terms of walk rate, strikeout rate, things like that. He does seem to be doing a little bit more damage on batted balls, which is nice. I know that he got surgery. I think it was a core injury, like right after the season last year. So that tells me maybe he wasn't at 100% and now he's able to, perform like his true self. So I don't know if I'm necessarily willing to buy high on him, but I do have confidence that he can finish in the top 12 shortstops, I think, which would be a pretty nice return considering he was almost, the 20th shortstop off the board, like you said.
Yeah, I was looking at some of his PLV stats, and a lot of the underlying metrics actually are about the same. Like good, making good decisions, good contact. But yeah, maybe the difference this year is maybe a tiny bit more power, which could be because of that injury that you mentioned.
Yeah, I kind of see him as like sorry, just real quick, a poor man's like Zach Neto, kind of like he
Mm.
doesn't stand out in any one category, but he's just across the board. He's not going to hurt you anyway, right? He's going to hit 240, 250, 20, 15, and decent counting stats, especially in that lineup. So kind of a quiet contributor that you might not think is a key piece of your team, but then you look back and you're like, wow, he was really consistent for me.
Right, yeah, like he's never moving off that spot on your fantasy team,
Mhm.
but he's also not necessarily one of the flashy guys that you're always excited to see in
Yeah.
the lineup. All right, moving on to pitching. Thanks to Nick for the Tools of the Slade SP Roundup article, of course, referring to Slade Jaconi, who got traded over to the Guardians this offseason for Josh Naylor. But we're going to talk about Drew Rasmussen of the Tampa Bay Rays. Went up against Miami and got the win. 6 innings, no earned runs, 4 hits, no walks, and 5 strikeouts. Yeah, it took basically 2 months for Rasmussen to get his first quality start. Did this in 81 pitches against the Marlins, dominated as a good pitcher should. His cutter and sinker were really, really solid against right-handers, and then the four-seamer was great up in the zone against lefties. The only problem was his breakers only had 0 whiffs on his sweepers and curves. So there's still some growth that could probably happen for Rasmussen, but he's been really, really solid. The schedule also is like really good for him. The Tampa Bay has got a nice cushy schedule in the next couple of weeks, and even though Rasmussen has always struggled with injury, when he's healthy, he's really, really good. He currently has a 2.93 ERA. He's got a 1 WHIP. I think Nick has him ranked 35 or something like that. I've got him on at least one of my fantasy teams. I think my home league. For me, I don't really know. Does Rasmussen have ace upside? I think I hesitate to say yes. I don't think he's ever going to maybe get to the top 20 range, but he's just a really solid guy to depend on. I think the one worry I have with him is just because he's part of the Tampa Bay Rays, they're going to limit the number of innings that he pitches. As we mentioned, it's been two months since he got his first quality start, so it's kind of unfortunate if you're in a quality start league. Also, kind of unfortunate if you're in a wins league because he does play for Tampa Bay. But yeah, any thoughts on Rasmussen? What his ceiling could look like this season?
Yeah, I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head there. If we were rating pitchers on a per inning basis, maybe he would have ace upside, but that's not how fantasy works, right? He's not going to be a great source of quality starts, and he's going to be an okay source of wins at best, just because Tampa's not a great team, and he's also not working deep into the game where he's going to be lined up for a decision consistently. So I do think that, like you said, he's 34th on the list right now. I do think that around 30 is kind of his ceiling, just because he's never going to give you the volume that a lot of the other top tier pitchers will. He's going to give you the quality, and this was nice to see. He had given up 3 or more runs in his 4 previous starts before this, so it was nice to see him get back on track. But yeah, I do think that he's going to have a tough time shouldering a full workload. You hope that the Rays will let him at least get 30 starts, and the ratios are going to look really good. So he's a nice mid rotation stabilizer. I don't think he has the upside for anything more than that, unfortunately, at least not this year, coming off of the surgeries and all that.
Yeah, and he might never get to that point because he's with Tampa Bay. But at the same time, that sort of process could help him stay healthy for longer. And even if he's only like a 5 innings per start guy, that still plays with if the ratios are good. He is still getting strikeouts, just isn't necessarily contributing in all the starter categories that you're kind of hoping for an ace to contribute in.
Yeah, next year is his last year under contract with the Rays, so maybe they'll just completely let him go next year because they're not as tied to him. But I guess we'll see. So on Sunday the 18th, Johnny Gordon was on our hitter recap, and this was actually the Will Benson article because of his 2-homer game. Benson Burner was Johnny's title here. Since we already covered Will Benson, I'm going to talk about another guy who had a fantastic game on Sunday and has been really just on fire lately. That's Cody Bellinger of the Yankees. He was 3 for 3 with a double, a home run, a run, and 6 RBIs in this game, in addition to 2 walks. And this was in the crosstown series, rivalry weekend, quote unquote, as the MLB calls it. And Bellinger had a night to remember, helping Yankee fans around the world forget about Juan Soto playing across town now for the Mets. Bellinger has been red hot at the plate in May after an ice cold April. At the point of this game, he had a 13-game hitting streak, and it's been extended well beyond that. At the time that we're recording, he was slashing 345, 415, 621 over his last 15 games. And even though he has been on fire on a surface level, Johnny just noted that the Grand Slam was a 356-foot short porch home run. And his barrel rate, hard hit rate, and max EV in 2025 are the best they've been since 2020. So he is showing a little bit of power gains. So Bellinger has had a fantastic May. He had 638 OPS in April, but his OPS in May is around 1.1. So he's completely flipped the script. He was kind of a fade for me. He was going around pick 80, which just felt a little bit rich. I know people were betting on him having a great offensive season in the Bronx, And so far, they're looking like it was a smart bet. He's on pace for around 25 homers and 15 steals with 160 runs and RBI. So, do we like his chances of returning ADP value based on what we've seen so far?
Yeah, I mean, if you said that a former MVP is going to bat behind Aaron Judge, is a lefty in the Bronx, like, yeah, I can understand why people were kind of hyped out about that. Uh, of course, it's Cody Bellinger who has cold streaks, has a lot of cold streaks actually, I should say, over the past couple seasons. And so I think you were probably right to fade him. I definitely was not going to pay pick 80, for him. That just seems a little too much, right? That's like round 7, round 8, kind of outfielder 2 territory almost. And yeah, I probably would not have picked him there, but he's clearly proving us wrong by being awesome and obviously playing in a park that works really well to his strengths. In terms of returning his ADP value, right now everything points to it working out for him. I mean, he bats behind Judge, which is one of the best places to be in a lineup. And I was super frustrated with this game actually because I needed 2 runs from Judge to get a bigger lead in my matchup, and I only got 1. He struck out, and then Belly came. He struck out with the bases loaded, and then Belly came on and hit the grand slam. So,
Oh, jeez.
little frustrated by this happening actually. But at the end of the day, like Belly's taking full advantage of his position. I believe is this the last year of his contract?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So he's also playing for something a little extra, right? Hoping to get re-signed if by the Yankees, or at least put up a good enough showing to get signed somewhere else. And he's still relatively young. I think we all forget how young Belly is because of how many years he's played in the majors. But yeah, I would not be surprised if he was able to you know get those stats that you were talking about: 25 homers, 15 stolen bases, 160 runs and RBI combined. Like that seems like a really solid outfielder too to me, and someone worth putting the investment of like a 7th round pick in.
Yeah, yeah, I think that he's just inside the top 100 right now. It seems like in terms of value so far. So I think it's going to be that you're happy that you got him. You don't get a huge value necessarily, but he about returns, what his pick was. So you're not bummed that you missed him, but you're also not annoyed that he's on your team. So I think he'll be a solid, well-rounded contributor. So on the pitching side, on Sunday the 18th, it was a season debut that I wanted to talk about. It's not Mick Abel, who was Nick's SP Roundup cover boy for this day, and just not going to talk about him because he was sent back to AAA, as we said. So I'm going to talk about Zebby Matthews, who had a little bit of a disappointing MLB season debut. He did come up last year as well. He pitched at the Brewers, which is a little bit of an easier matchup. So it was unfortunate to see him only go 3 innings with 4 earned, 5 hits, 3 walks, and 5 strikeouts. 6 whiffs, 24% CSW on 71 pitches. Zebby struck out the side in a clean first inning and then escaped the jam with just 1 run in the second. But then in the third, he uncharacteristically walked the bases loaded and allowed 3 runs to score. So he kind of showed both sides of the disappointing MLB debut that we saw last year. And a lot of it was because he struggled to find the zone with his slider, just a 42% strike rate, as Nick noted. Nick is still, even though there was some poor control here in the season debut, willing to give Zebby another shot. He'll be pitching again this weekend. I was excited for this one. Plugged him into a couple of lineups. Obviously, was disappointed with the result. It was nice to see that his velo maintained up from last year, which was what we had seen in the minors so far. I think there's some people who are combining this start with Zebby's. He just kind of got shelled last year in about 8 starts in the majors, and thinking that the hype with this guy is greater than the potential. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I understand the concern, but I do think that he's a guy who can string some quality starts together when he's going well.
Yeah, the big thing about that third inning was that he threw like 43 pitches. So after doing that, the Twins were in no way bringing him back out for the fourth, even though he escaped the third. And one thing I noted about this start, and it's the weird thing about Zebby, right, is that in the minors, the guy has an incredible strikeout to walk ratio because he just literally does not walk anyone. And it's kind of the question of like, what does minor league command look like compared to major league command? In the sense that like major leaguers are more likely to lay off pitches that are just outside the zone or something like that because they just have better eyes because they're major leaguers. They're not AAA AAA batters. And so it could be like he's kind of getting away with pitches that are kind of just outside the zone because AAA hitters are more likely to swing on that rather than major league hitters, I should say. But at the same time, he's still really solid. I thought it was kind of weird. He only threw one curveball and one changeup in this matchup, but he's kind of known as a kitchen sink guy. He's got five, really solid pitches. He only threw two of them once, which is kind of weird to me. And so, yeah, I think he went fastball, cutter, and slider. I think those are
Yeah.
the three pitches he relied on. So I think if he can mix in that curveball and changeup a bit more, if he feels more comfortable with those pitches, and granted, those were the pitches he struggled with last season as well. But if you can kind of feel a little bit more comfortable with those, with the full five pitch arsenal, I think he can be a legitimate major league guy. I just think we need to see the growth from him to get there. And again, remember, he went from high A to the majors last season. So the guy is still developing. Um, maybe he's not up worth a pickup in 10 teamers or maybe even some 12 teamers because he's still young and still figuring it out. But I think he's got a good track record ahead of him that he's going to be a solid guy in the majors.
Yeah, yeah, I do think he kind of lacks the swing and miss pitch right now, which is going to make his major league strikeout rates look a little more pedestrian than what we saw in the minors. But I do think that he has great control. I think it remains to be seen if he has great command in terms of putting pitches in the right spots to limit damage. I do think that these walks are a blip. I think he's going to be a strike thrower, but that could lead to hard contact. We see that with guys who throw a lot of strikes like George Kirby or somebody like that. But yeah, I think that this is I wouldn't read into this too much. I think he's got a good chance to right the ship. But in your shallower leagues, like you said, you don't need to necessarily take the chance on that. You can wait and see, how it looks before going to get him. I'm holding him in my 12 and in my 16, but I would understand, sitting him or dropping him in favor of a streamer if you want. But I think he's gonna return some value over the course of the year for your teams.
Yeah. All right, moving on to Monday. Thanks to Christian Ottoman for the Jesus Takes the Wheel hitter recap article talking about Jesus Sanchez of the Miami Marlins. But we are going to talk about another guy, Nolan Shanuel of the Angels. Went 3 for 4 with 2 doubles, a homer, 2 runs, and an RBI. If you ignore counting stats, Shanuel's got a pretty solid year. He's slashing 278, 368. But only slugging 405 because unfortunately he's not the prototypical power hitting first baseman. He's got good ratios, but just does not have any power whatsoever. I mean, he's got some. He has 3 homers on the season, but only 13 extra base hits. He's got a really great eye in the plate. Obviously, you just mentioned that average in the OBP. He's got a 12% walk rate, which makes his value shoot up even more in OBP leagues. But honestly, the lack of hard contact and barrels is always going to depress his value. Any thoughts on Shanuel and being able to develop, even passable power at the first baseman position, or is this version of Shanuel just going to be the one that we have to live with? And maybe he's a fringe first baseman in 12 teamers, but I don't know if he's ever going to be more than that in fantasy.
Yeah, I'm incapable of getting excited about him. I mean, it's impressive that he was brought up to the major leagues, right? The same year that he was drafted and has held his own that year and each of the 2 seasons after that. He's an above average hitter, right? But he's an above average hitter in real life. He's not an above average hitter in fantasy just because of the power is just you hope for double digits, right? Which is just such a weird profile for a first baseman. And I don't think that he is capable of tapping into all that much more. His bat speed is close to the bottom of the league. His barrel rate is close to the bottom of the league, right? He's a hit and eye over power first baseman, which just doesn't have a ton of utility in most fantasy leagues. Really, I don't even have that much interest in him in like 15 teamers. He kind of seems like a Ty France like type guy, and I guess he's had some good seasons, right? But it's hard to really be too invested in a guy like that.
Yeah, he's got 3 homers and it's May. Like that should kind of tell you everything you need to know about the power production from Shanuel. And yeah, you don't draft first baseman to be good sources of average, unfortunately.
Yeah, maybe if he was in a better lineup, I could get a little bit more interested, but I can't do it on the Angels.
Yeah, that's true. The runs in RBI, like even though he's hitting, he's just not getting that right now because there's just no one getting on base in that organization. All right, moving on to pitchers. Thanks to Nick for the one Pep at a time SP Roundup article talking about Ryan Pepio. But we are going to talk about Robbie Ray instead of the San Francisco Giants. Got a no decision against Kansas City. 7 innings, no one runs, 6 hits, 1 walk, and 7 strikeouts. That's Ray's fifth of 10 starts this season with 1 earned run or fewer. Fourth of those 5 have at least 7 strikeouts, which is pretty awesome. He's moved from kind of the fastball heavy setup that he was doing, 60 to 7% fastballs, and is tossing in more breaking pitches like his slider, his curves, also throwing more changeups. And every single pitch that day held a 68% strike rate or better, which is pretty solid. He had 9 out of 10 whips, I believe, on a changeup, got a 50% CSW, which is kind of insane. This is the Robbie Ray of our dreams. It's almost almost the Cy Young version of Robbie Ray exactly, and he's doing a really good job in terms of just the location. Good Blake Snell blueprint, fastballs up, breaking pitches down, and I'll be honest, I've kind of Robbie Ray's a little bit of an afterthought for me. I think once he got Tommy John and then just basically lost 2 seasons of baseball, it was really easy for me to forget him. I believe he's 33 now, so it was also kind of like older pitcher. I don't know if I want to go after that, but he's really been awesome this season. He's got a 2.67 ERA, a 1.22 WHIP. Those numbers aren't necessarily close to his Cy Young season in 2021, but there's definitely some shades of that type of excellence. I mean, he doesn't necessarily have all the elite numbers that he had in 2021, but is having good strikeout numbers. Like I mentioned, very good ratios as well. Is this the Robbie Ray that we expect to see for the rest of the season? Obviously, he's a little bit older, but the numbers look really, really good. And if he's really changing his arsenal to focus a bit more on the breaking pitches, there could be some recipe for success here instead of just going in with the heaters for most of the time.
Yeah, I think, in this case, two things can be true at once. And the first one is that Robbie Ray has been great so far and that he'll deliver some value for your fantasy teams over the full season. But the second thing that's also true, I think, is that this is not the pitcher that he is. He's not a sub-3 ERA guy anymore. He's 6-0 right now with a 2.7 ERA, and he's striking out over a batter an inning. So you've banked some tremendous value already from Robbie Ray. The 1.22 WHIP is cutting into that a little bit. What I think is WHIP is a little bit of a disregarded stat just because we tend to focus on ERA a little bit more. But I don't think that even with the revamped arsenal that this is the guy he is. If you want to look at whether your thing is pitching plus or whether your thing is PLV or whether your thing is ERA estimators, all of those are telling you that he's a slightly above average starter at best. And some of those are even telling you that he's a below average starter. I mean, his pitching plus is, I think, like 91. His PLV is in like the 30th percentile. So I don't think that he's a guy who's going to maintain this kind of ERA run. He's obviously on a great heater right now, and he pitches in a good park, right? So he has some things working in his favor. But I think that the where he's going to really return value is the strikeouts, right? I think at the end of the year, he'll maybe have a low to mid threes ERA, which is good, not great. He'll have a whip that probably is going to hurt you a little bit, but he'll hopefully have close to 200 strikeouts, and that's really why you target a guy like him.
Yeah, the scary thing is he's got an 11% walk rate. And
Mhm.
pitchers who give that many free passes, it just tends to not work out as well, right? You got more runners on the bases, you have more opportunities for guys to get batted in, and if you're not able to control that on your own, obviously he didn't have any walks in this one, so it worked out pretty well for him. Actually, sorry, he had 1 walk in this one. But if you have more, if there's like 2 or 3 or 4 guys getting free passes, you're just gonna be more susceptible to have that ERA just creep up more and more, even if you're in a good park like Oracle, right? So it's awesome. It's really cool to see from Robbie Ray that he's getting this. I hesitate to call it late career resurgence because he's only 33, but having been out of baseball for essentially 2 seasons, I think it's at least encouraging to see uh, that he's at least back and being pretty good.
Yeah, no, I'm not a Robbie Ray hater. I did have some interest in him in draft season because of the revamped changeup. I wasn't able to get him because he just got so much helium. It was being pushed close to like pick 120 or 130, and I just couldn't justify paying that price. So I think he was a nice get right in your pick 150 to 200 range, and you're definitely happy with what you've gotten so far. I just don't know if it's gonna 100% last.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So on Tuesday, the 20th, Scott McDermott was on our hitter recap, which was a foreseeable breakout. A little pun there for Seiya Suzuki, who's been a longtime favorite of mine. he was being drafted around pick 100 this year, in the same range as guys like Brian Reynolds and Riley Green. And the Cubs offense has turned into one of the best in the league. So he's looking like a really good bargain. His barrel rate is up around 15%, which is a career best. His average exit velocity has ticked up about a mile per hour, and his X slugging is over 500. He's up to 12 home runs, including in this game, which was a 14-1 rout of the Marlins. Suzuki was slumping a little bit in May due to some poor swing decisions, but it seems like he's gotten back on track a little bit. And it seems like he is maybe tapping into his power a little bit more, perhaps at the expense of a little bit of contact and speed and batting average. But he, like I said, 12 homers, which is already more than half of his total last year of 21. So it seems like he's on pace for, an easy career power season. And I'm thinking that this might be a little bit of a power breakout on Suzuki's part. I think he's changing his fantasy profile a little bit in a way that should be beneficial, with the keys, coming from tapping into more pull power. His pulled batted balls in the air so far represent 25.4% of his batted balls, which is well up from 15% in the past 2 years, with the MLB average being around 17%. So he is, he's really just kind of selling out for that pull side power, which, as we know, is where a lot of home runs come from. So he's kind of turning himself into a legitimate slugger instead of just kind of a well-rounded fantasy asset.
Yeah, looking at Seiya Suzuki, I mean, the biggest thing is that he has Kyle Tucker batting in front of him right now, right? That's just going to lead to more RBI opportunities for him. But the fact that, looking at his stats, right? If you look at just the underlying stats, the one major difference is that pull percentage that you mentioned, right? Even if you're just not looking at balls in the air, just pull percentage in general, it's gone up from his career when he had a really solid year in 2023. It was at 36%, 37% pull power. This season right now through 2 months, it's at 44%, right? So he's clearly making changes in that department. That seems to be the only place that he's really making any difference, right? He's not necessarily hitting the ball harder more often, right? His hard contact rate is about league average at around 30%. Strikeout rates are kind of high-ish, but he still maintains a decent walk rate. Um, Being in the offense that he is, I think it's just his counting sets are going to look good, and as long as this pull strategy to get more homers is working out for him, yeah, I think it could work out really well. I think the other cool thing is that his strikeout rate just has not changed that much, right? It's 27% last year, now it's 28%. So even though he's selling out for more power, it's not coming at the expense of more strikeouts. Yeah, I'm fully in on Seiya. Fortunately I don't think I have him anywhere, but I've always liked him as a player, as a guy that in fantasy. Just have never been able to kind of pay the price for him because usually I like getting two really good outfielders and then waiting on outfielders till like the mid tens. So I usually miss these guys at pick 100. But yeah, really really glad to see that he's breaking out a little bit this season, and especially on a team like the Cubs that is really good. It's nice to see the entire team kind of working well and playing off. Basically, because they gambled and got Kyle Tucker, and really it's looking like it's working out really well for them.
Yeah, yeah, it's a super fun middle of the order there with Suzuki and Tucker. Obviously, Suzuki does have some durability issues. I don't think he's made it through a full MLB season yet completely healthy. So knock on wood, hopefully that's this year, and he's able to just put up a ridiculous power RBI season. Yeah, the pull power is great. Baseball Savant just started putting that data up this year, I think, and when I'm looking to see if a guy is developing from a power perspective, I really like to take a look at that pull power, just because that's where most guys hit their home runs, right? You have guys who have crazy juice who can spray it out all over the field, but for most people, that's what we want to see is, are you pulling the ball more in the air to kind of max out your power potential?
Yeah.
On the pitching side on this day, Will Warren was our SP Roundup cover boy from Nick, which was Warren Substance, the title. And I will be talking about Will Warren because he was fantastic. After last week's performance in Seattle, Nick didn't feel like he was quite ready to jump in on the Will Warren trade, even though his stuff is obviously excellent. But he sometimes loses feel for the zone and struggles to command his pitches, which have a lot of movement. But in this outing, he was fantastic. It was against a weaker Rangers offense, but still, 5 2/3 scoreless innings, 5 hits, 1 walk, 10 strikeouts, 13 whiffs, and a 35% CSW on 101 pitches. He did get the win, even though he couldn't quite get to the quality start. Will Warren just kind of has a deep arsenal. He's a fastball and sinker guy. Even though he was known as a sinker guy, his fastball actually has a really nice shape at the top of the zone. He's also got the sweeper, changeup. He's just kind of a very well-rounded pitcher. At this point, Nick is pretty bought in, despite some occasional lapses in execution. He does have Coors Field this weekend, which is about an average matchup these days, so not super concerning, although it's followed by the Dodgers and then Fenway. So a couple of really tough tests coming up for Will Warren. But at the same time, it seems like he's showcased enough upside that maybe we kind of need to hold him on our teams rather than treating him as just a streamer, which I think I featured him last week or 2 weeks ago. So clearly, the right time to hop on the train.
Yeah, I think we actually talked about Warren last week specifically, and I think my analysis at the time was like, oh, he's a really good pitcher to get wins, but maybe that's it. And clearly, the strikeout ability is it's impressive. Through 46 innings so far, he's got a nearly 30% strikeout rate. That seems like a pretty good sample size. A lot of that isn't necessarily coming from swinging strikes though, which maybe is a little scary. He's got a 27% strikeout rate on this called strike rate, I should say, on the sweeper, which seems kind of high for a pitch that is more often featured, I guess, as a whiff pitch. But I guess he's getting a bunch of called strikes with it. So maybe that's the place where I'd hesitate. If it's a guy who's getting a bunch of called strikes, um, maybe I'm a little hesitant because he's not necessarily inducing whiffs to get strikeouts. But at the same time, it's hard to argue against his numbers right now. Really good CSWs, really decent ground ball rate, 50% ground ball rate, which I think probably plays a little bit to his success. Is walking guys at a decent clip, 9%. Don't love that. But again, this is a guy who I think he's the number 4 pitcher in the Yankees rotation. I might be wrong on that. But he's still a really good pick for wins. He's not going to get kicked out of the rotation anytime soon, at least. So his spot there is pretty secure. I think there are worse pitchers that you could have on your fantasy teams, and I think Warren probably is worth a look in 12 teamers if you've got a spot.
Yeah, I think that strikeout ground ball combo that you mentioned puts him in a really good place. The strikeouts are probably going to regress a little bit, like you said. I do think he'll get a lot of called strikes because of the sinker sweeper combo, but not quite to the extent maybe that he's shown so far. I think you don't want to start him probably against the Dodgers, depending on your circumstances, but I don't think you can cut him loose. I think the upside is just a little bit too high.
Yeah, I agree. All right, finally, Wednesday. Thanks to Kyle Stansel for the Welcome to the Hit Paredes hitter recap article. Of course, referring to Estock Paredes. But we're going to talk about a guy that Patrick knows pretty well, Adley Rutschman of the Baltimore Orioles. 2 for 6 with a homer, a double, a run, and 3 RBI. Yeah, to say that Adley is struggling is maybe an easy way of saying how this season is going. He's currently ranked 27th among catchers in 5x5 roto leagues, which is far below where he was getting drafted. He's below league average on his entire slash line. He's barely above average at runs and homers. Yeah, his struggles last year have been pretty well documented. I know there was like some rumors of like injury maybe was the reason for some of these issues. But it looks like all of the issues that were plaguing him last year have come back or have gotten worse actually in this season. Looking at our POV metrics, his contact ability still remains elite. That's still really good. And his exit velocities might not seem to have fallen. So I'm honestly kind of confused what's wrong with Adley. Why are his numbers just so bad? The only clear explanation I could see is that his BABIP has completely cratered. It was 303 in 2023. It's now 233 in 2025. And based on our PUV expected stats, he should be producing much better than what he is right now. I know you weren't writing the Patience and Panic article this week, but Jeffrey Geis, I think, was, and he was saying, we should be patient with Adley, which I think makes sense, right? He's still a guy who, was drafted as a top 5 catcher. I don't think you're willing to cut bait on him immediately, but at the same time, these just aren't great numbers. So as a guy who's watched a lot of Adley games, what's your thought on him? Is he someone who is he kind of cooked or is there kind of hope for a turnaround for him?
I'm pretty hopeful. I think that it has been a lot of bad luck, like you said. It seems like the whole team is dealing with that. I mean, he's making more contact than he ever has. He's chasing less than he ever has. The BABIP, it's not like he's just hitting a bunch of fly balls instead of line drives and ground balls that would cause the BABIP to drop like that. So it's just like I think that the process is good. I mean, he's always had a great process as a hitter, so I don't think that we need to sound the alarms and call him Matt Wieters 2.0 or whatever Orioles fans are doing. Like he's a tremendous talent. He might not be the best catcher in the league at any point, right? But I think he's still a top 5 catcher in the league. I don't know if he's a top 5 fantasy catcher though, right? He's not a guy who I really roster just because I think that he's just a better real life player than a fantasy player. Like a lot of catchers, but specifically him because he doesn't have crazy juice, right? He can hit 20 home runs, but he's probably not going to hit 30 and he's going to walk a lot, which doesn't always get valued in a fantasy context. So I think that I understand combining his bad second half last year with the bad start this year, has people wanting to think that he's not the player that he once was. I'm not really ready to make that claim. I believe in the talent. I believe in his approach. So I'm relatively optimistic.
Yeah, and I think just based on PLV metrics, right? Like the fact that his contact ability has maintained, top, I think 90th percentile status, is pretty impressive. And all that should speak to the fact that he should be producing better than he is right now. And it is frustrating that he isn't. So hopefully he's able to turn around. Yeah, it is kind of the scenario where he's like a really decently real life catcher with his ratios. It just doesn't necessarily come with a bunch of counting stats, which is unfortunate. Kind of similar to Nolan Shanuel almost. Obviously, Adley's probably a little bit better in terms of how he relates to other catchers versus how Shanuel relates to other first basemen. But it is similar in the sense that like you love the process at the plate, you love what that can kind of generate, but at the same time, like it doesn't result in a lot of home runs or extra base hits, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it's just like if you're upset about how Ali Rutschman's performing, tell me what specifically you think he should be doing better because he's
Yeah,
not striking out, he's not chasing, he's not, trying to pull everything for a home run. Like I don't know.
yeah.
Maybe it's just everything will look better under the hood than on the surface, and that's just the type of player he is. But I'm not gonna say that right now.
Yeah, I was literally looking at the numbers from like 2023 to 2025 because 2023 was like a pretty solid season. And
Hmm.
it's like nothing's changed, right? He's not like drastically hitting way more ground balls or popping up a ton or striking out a ton. Like the numbers are very similar. It's like the only thing that's changed is the BABIP, which is so weird. Yeah, and it feels weird to chalk it up to bad luck, but that's kind of what's been happening.
Baseball can be cruel sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Another way baseball's cruel is what we're going to talk about in our pitcher recap article. Thanks to Nick for the Gavin a Good Time SP Roundup article. And of course, referring to Gavin Williams facing my Minnesota Twins. 6 innings, 1 earned run, 2 hits, 2 walks, and 6 strikeouts. I only say this is cruel because I've rostered Gavin Williams on multiple fantasy teams this season, and he has not been good, and he decided to be good against the Twins when I didn't have him on any of my rosters. And honestly, the reason why is because of his cutter, which, if you've been following Nick on his SP Roundup articles, just his SP Streamer articles, he's been basically demanding for Gavin Williams to use this cutter that he showed off in spring training and just has not used at all this entire season until he faced the Twins. And the weird thing about this cutter is that Nick's like, it's not even that great of a pitch. It just offers something different in comparison to his fastball. Kind of operates in a different velocity band as his fastball, operates in a different velocity band than his sweeper, and so it just gives him more versatility with those two pitches, his four seamer and his sweeper specifically, to be better. The four seamer was cooking, had 10 whiffs, had a 36% CSW by itself. Sweeper was getting whiffs as well. I still personally am not ready to jump up back on the Gavin train. I think this was just one showing so far. It was also kind of a weird rainy day. But that being said, he gets the Dodgers next, so don't run out and grab him. But if in that start he starts using that cutter more and more, and this seems like a real change to his arsenal that he's finally showcasing 2 months into the season, I think he's got some. There's reasons to pick him up. He's got some nice matchups coming up too. I think he's facing the Angels next week or maybe the week after. So yeah, Gavin Williams, I think maybe making an Arsenal change finally, as Nick's been asking. But yeah, any thoughts on Gavin Williams? Is he a guy that you're kind of interested in picking up? He's kind of a waiver wire guy for me in 12 teamers, but if he starts showing something different, he could be a guy who becomes almost like a not a must pick up, but a guy who should be picked up in most leagues.
Yeah, he was dropped in my 12-teamer and actually went for a decent amount of fab, like the Yahoo waiver fab, that you can only use on guys who are on waivers. I think it went for like 10% or 11% of the budget. So I was gonna, keep tabs on him had he not been added and just see how things were going because he has high upside for sure. He could be a big strikeout arm. The walks are a real concern. I mean, he hasn't shown, I don't think, in his entire professional career that he can be a guy who carries at even an average walk rate. So I think that the whip is going to be detrimental as a result, maybe similarly to a guy like Robbie Ray. So I'm interested in him in the right context. If you have a good staff and you can sit him in specific starts, I think that he's worth picking up and then sit against the Dodgers, start against the Angels, something like that. But I don't think that he is a great like quality starts guy because of the walks and all that. But the cutter should at least keep guys off his other pitches and hopefully, just make him a little bit less hittable. I don't know if it'll affect, his ability to throw strikes, but it is at least a nice development.
Yeah. One that we've been waiting for quite a bit, and he finally started
Yeah.
to show it. All right, well, that wraps it up for player performances. A lot of good performance outs here. And of course, check out those articles because we are barely scraping the surface on the guys who were awesome in fantasy this week. But now we're going to move on to streamers. Just a recap of who we talked about last week. Jamison Tyone had a really solid week for him. Got a win in 7 innings pitched. Ben Brown, his first start, got a no decision. Second start is still to come this week. Cade Horton, also a no decision, went 5.1 innings, only 3 strikeouts though, unfortunately. Will Warren, as we discussed, had a pretty good game for himself. And then Landon Roop, he has not gone yet, but we'll talk about his start next week. But who are the guys to target this week, or I guess technically next week in fantasy?
Yeah, so going back to the well on a couple of these guys, just because the Cubs have just had fantastic matchups that I know I've been talking about it a lot, but it's true. Not going to go Ben Brown this time as he did burn us a little bit. Kind of like, I said, it could be a ratio risk, and it turned out to be, unfortunately. We'll see how the second start goes. But I will be going back to the well on Jamison Tyone and Cade Horton. Tyone's 31% Yahoo, 21% ESPN, and Horton is 22% Yahoo, 9% ESPN. Surprised I can still include Tyone here. He's got 2 home starts, Colorado, Cincinnati. I think I mentioned that last week, but pretty much as good as it gets. Next week after that's going to be Tigers on the road, so not super interesting, kind of a medium to difficult matchup. And then potentially the Pirates after that. So I think you can continue to hold him even with the Tigers after the 2 start. Horton's got the Rockies at home this week, and then the next week could be a 2 start against the Nationals and Tigers, which is enticing, not necessarily a must start, but definitely appealing. It looks like Shota Imanaga is going to be out for a good amount of June, Craig Counsell said, like we talked about earlier. So that should give Horton some real runway to perform in the rotation. And then pair those 2 Cubs arms together, but someone that I actually like a little bit more than Horton is Ryan Weathers. I was really surprised that I could include him here based on rostership. He's 27% Yahoo, 10% ESPN. He's looked great so far. He just has made 2 starts coming back from a forearm strain in spring training. He's thrown 10 innings, 2 earned, both against the Cubs, actually. So done great in 2 hard matchups. This week, he will get at San Diego and home against the Giants. So those are kind of middle of the pack hitting matchups, I would say. But Weathers is a good enough pitcher that I'm pretty excited about that. I think that he's going to be a guy you hold, all season pretty much, barring injury. He's flashed improved stuff from his past years, sitting like 97, 97 and a half. And yeah, he just looks like a really well-rounded pitcher that could deliver consistently strong performances for you. And then another 2 start guy, a little bit less interesting, but still a decent option. Michael Lorenzen, 19% Yahoo, 12% ESPN. 2 home starts against Cincinnati and Detroit. Cincinnati at home, Nick's calling them the red carpet now because they just roll out the red carpet and you stroll right down. It's a great matchup there. Detroit a little bit more challenging. But KC's rotation is really banged up right now. So I think that they're going to let Lorenzen work deep if he's effective so that they can save their bullpen a little bit. And then 2 more just because I did think that there was pretty good streaming options this week. This one is, again, a little bit further down the pecking order. Zach Littell, 15% Yahoo, 6% ESPN. 2 starts, home against Minnesota, at Houston. Good option in deeper quality start and points leagues, but not a good source of strikeouts. I think around 5 or 6 per 9. His ratios have been serviceable this year, 4.25 ERA, 1.15 whip. and he averages almost 6 innings per start. So a good quality starts guy, like I said. And then lastly, in your deepest formats, Ryan Nelson, who we talked about earlier, he's only 1% on Yahoo and ESPN, but he gets a great home 2-star week against Pittsburgh and Washington. He's already built up to 71 pitches, so he should be pretty close to full go for this 2-start. And he's best of a play in deeper points and especially wins leagues with a good team behind him and easy matchups.
Yeah, I will say if you're sometimes a vibes-based guy, like I can sometimes be with fantasy baseball, Ryan Weathers against San Diego, that's a revenge matchup. Michael Lorenz against Detroit, that's also a revenge matchup. And Zach Littell against Minnesota, also a revenge matchup. So I'm not sure if any of those guys have any sort of real desire to be awesome in those games. I think Ryan Weathers is legit. I mean, I think you should go pick him up. I have him on my home league team pretty much immediately. I picked him up last week, or actually earlier this week. And then Jameson Taillon is also on that home league team because he's basically has had 4 awesome starts starting from earlier this week. So, yeah, both those guys I think should be rostered for the next couple weeks. Taillon probably maybe worth dropping after that start against the Pirates, but check out what his matchups are. If they're still pretty good, that Cubs team is going to provide him so much run support that at least in wins leagues, I think he'll still retain some value.
Yeah, I really like Weathers. I'm super excited about him this year. He was my first triple digit fab bid of the season in my RotoWire Online Championship. I think it was like 107, so not high into triple digits, but I'm pretty excited about him. Even though he's not going to be a great source of wins, I think that his ratios are going to be solid, and the K should be above average too.
Yeah, big fan of the strikeouts from Weathers. I think the updated arsenal for him should work out super well. All right, well, that wraps it up for streamers. Again, you can find us at This Week PL on Twitter. You can send us your comments or questions at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. You can find myself on Twitter at TheJohnK. You can find Patrick at PFitzgerald_99. Again, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the Pitcher List podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. Lastly, sign up for Pitcher List Pro. By doing so, you can join us on the Pitcher List Discord, get advice from all the fantasy experts and writers over there. But that is all for this week and this episode. We'll be back next week with another episode of This Week in Fantasy Baseball. For Patrick, I'm John, and we'll see you in the next one. Later, everyone.